Achtung, attention, 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 attention. Gee, goddamn, what's happening? Hello, and welcome to
Could you pour me another cup of tea, please?
It is the 6th of June, and as we all know, we have Ways listeners, independent company members, casual people who've stumbled across this podcast for the first time. That is the anniversary, the 76th anniversary, indeed, of D-Day today. Should have been yesterday, of course. Everyone knows that, but it's today. And in the wake of our Dunkirk specials, we thought we'd at least
we'll do a D-Day special.
Do something for D-Day, but we're not going to do one for every day of the Overlord campaign.
God, one day, imagine
all the way through till
77
August.
days of it would be good, though, wouldn't it?
Oh, no! Don't go making promises we can't keep, James Holland.
I'm not promising anything. I'm just saying it would be fun.
No, it would be fun. Maybe next year. If we're still locked down this time next year, we'll commit to that. Okay.
But hopefully we'll be gadding around, sort of, actually walking the ground out rather than
it'd be lovely.
Now, dens.
Of course, and it's just not just walking the ground. It's eating the cheese and drinking the cider.
Of course. Goes that saying.
Big plates of tripe and all
Yes.
that. Now, so well, here we are to talk about it. You've only gone and written a book about it. So, it's not like this is going to be a perfunctory chat, is it? But one thing that you've mentioned this several times before is when we've talked. There's so much, obviously, stuffed into the D-Day pie. But when you came back to the paperback edition of your book, Normandy 44, because after all, D-Day is, of course, only the beginning of this massive campaign, and
well, I would
so
say
much
it's not even the beginning.
Commemoration.
I would say it's not even the beginning.
Yeah.
It's the start of the actual invasion, but the D-Day operation begins a lot earlier.
Yeah.
It's
let's call it the tip. Let's call it the tipping point then. The
all
point
right.
where
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Tips from. Yeah, we take that. Okay, great. So, but the point is because this time last year there were all the commemorations and Trump looking awkward and David Haig's play with the word "fuck" in it in front of the Queen and all this sort of stuff.
Yes, yeah.
At Portsmouth, and then the might of the 3 planes of the RAF.
Oh my God! Do you know what? That was the single most humiliating thing I've experienced of British power, inverted commas, in a very long time. That really was awful, because I was standing there down there. I was doing sort of BBC stuff on that day, and I remember glancing across it, and I could see Trump, and he did look really orange. That's the one thing I remember about him. But then the RAF fly past. It was like, why didn't they just send over the BBMF? And they red arrows, done deal.
Yeah. Well, because. We have
awful.
4 jets and we need to get the air miles on them or BAE will take them back. It's as simple as that.
So, yeah, it was.
What do you mean you haven't flown it this month? Anyway, but when you came back to your second edition, the paperback, wasn't it? You did what a lot of authors sometimes do, and you said, there's bits I've got to rejig, I've got to rewrite.
Well, it's such a vast subject. It is, and we have our conversations and we meet people and we talk to people, and I'm constantly honing what I think I know about this subject. I'm not talking just about D-Day and Normandy. I'm talking about the whole Second World War. I absolutely don't claim to kind of know everything by any stretch of the imagination. I kind of feel I've just scraped the tip of the iceberg. And D-Day, there's other stuff. You get talking to people and people say stuff and you suddenly go, God, I haven't really thought about that before. That's really interesting. And then there's sort of things that you start. Particularly that week, actually, I was asked to do various talks and I met a lot of people, and I just suddenly started thinking, God, well, I should have, when it came to the book, I should have kind of underlined that point a little bit more, and I should have done that. And so when it came to kind of doing the paperback edition of Normandy, I said to them, look, I'd quite like to make some changes here, and I wanted to kind of sort of change some of the personnel around. There was an issue, there was a sort of question mark over one of the Germans, and whether he was, whether it was all just made up and whether it was real or not. And I felt it probably was real, but I felt a bit uncomfortable about it, so I binned him and put someone else in. And I also got a guy in. I then read Flamethrower, that memoir of the crocodile, and I got a bit obsessed with crocodile. So I included him in it, which he hadn't been in the original one. So there are quite a few changes, but I suppose one of the key points I just thought was just how flipping good the Navy were, and I just felt I sort of said it, but I didn't know whether I'd really underlined it enough. And I've been really struck by this line from General, then later Field Marshal Alexander, who was saying that, modern warfare should be a brotherhood of air, land and sea. It is the army and the air force and the navy all working together. And I thought, well, yeah, absolutely. And that's what the Allies, the Western Allies, do. That's what the British and the Americans and Canadians are doing. But are the Germans doing that? No. Are the Soviet Union doing that? No. Are the Japanese doing it? Well, they're trying to. But the interesting thing about the Japanese, is while they have a kind of multifaceted way of war, they're not joined up because the army and the navy are such loggerheads, and they don't have an independent air force. They have the naval air force and the army air force. So no one's doing it quite as well as the Allies, the Western Allies are, which of course is why they kind of dominate, I guess. But naval power is such a key part. You just think about what you've got to do in a pre-digital age to organise all that. It absolutely makes your head hurt.
But also, I mean, and it's a point Eisenhower makes after the war that this is also the last time you can do this because because once the atom bomb comes along, a build-up of naval power it's the spare the pun, the high watermark of naval power here, isn't it? Because you can't once the atom bomb comes along, you can't gather that many ships in that kind of space because all the enemy's got to do is drop a nuke on it, and that's the end of that.
Yes,
so it is because after all, after the war, the British government scuttle vast numbers of ships, don't they? The Attlee government scuttle vast numbers of ships by an atom bomb because obviously think, well, we're never going to be able to do that again, and I think that's partly why the naval picture has faded because after all, it's really difficult to address history without addressing it from an anachronistic point of view, where naval power just isn't the thing on people's again, pardon the pun, on people's radar now, is it? We have a reduced navy. We aren't the great naval power we are, so we've kind of forgotten all about it. And when we talked to Steve Prince about Dunkirk, and then during Dunkirk week, we stumbled across this again. Just how massive, powerful, just exactly what the sinews of the Royal Navy are available, and that's in 1940, before the American shipyards come online, before British shipyards really start producing tons and tons of vessels, and it is this. It's this island power stuff that I think we just in the age of Spain, EasyJet to Spain for £1, we just don't think of shipping.
And yet today, and yet the world goes around by ship. I mean, oil is moved by ship,
of course,
literally everything is moved by, all freight is moved. Vast majority of freight is moved by ship. And naval power still gives you that kind of flexibility that you don't have from just air power because of the ability to move vast amounts of stuff. And actually, I think there's an argument, it's a weak argument, but there is an argument that if you were only going to have one of the armed services, you still have the Navy because we're an island nation, because, you can have aircraft on the Navy and you can have soldiers on the Navy. You can have Marines.
Well, yeah. Or nukes, and it's Trident.
Or nukes,
That's actually how that's happened, is the Navy got its hands on the deterrent.
Because one of the problems with the aircraft
went to the bottom of the sea with it.
One of the issues with the aircraft carriers is that you've got aircraft carriers, and that's great, but you haven't got the escort vessels to go with it. You can't just operate aircraft carriers on their own.
Yeah.
But anyway,
right. To go back to 1944, how many ships? The Navy deployed in 1944.
Well, it's 1,213 warships for D-Day. I mean, 1,213, of which 892 are in the Royal Navy. So the naval effort is overwhelmingly Royal Navy for D-Day. And that's because, of course, the US Navy is busy in the Pacific. And, it's a totally reasonable and fair proportion of responsibilities. And obviously, the invasion is coming from Britain. The Royal Navy is Britain's Navy. So, it makes perfect sense. It's important for people to understand that D-Day itself, there is a very large proportion which is British, not American, even though the narrative of it is all about kind of people, Tom Hanks and his trembling hands on his water bottle before the ramp comes down on Omaha Beach. But actually, it's more, it's more complex than that. But I think there's three instances where I think that illustrate the just total superiority of the Navy. And I'd like to make this other point, which is people argue the toss about, man for man, Germans and all the rest of it, and their tactical prowess and all that kind of crap. Yeah. But that is just land warfare, okay? When it comes to air power and naval power, the Allies, the Western Allies, the British and the Americans and the Canadians, are just at the top of the pile by a country mile. I mean, they just leave everyone standing. When it comes to the Navy, so the first biggest challenge for the Navy getting across is obviously just the logistics of organising it. Because it's not just getting people onto the beaches, it's then the follow-up stuff. And it's then going back to England, refilling, coming back over again. And what goes where? And what fire support are you giving at what particular time? And then you've got to get the gooseberries over, and you've got to get all these ships across, sink them, make a kind of breakwater, all the rest of it. It is the complexity is just absolutely
and you're minesweeping the entire time as well, aren't you?
Minesweeping the whole time, but there is
aside from these sort of
the minesweeping is I think one of the most impressive and least known and least appreciated operations of the whole thing. This is obviously part of Operation Neptune, which is the actual naval part of Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. The minesweeping operation is just extraordinary. It involves 255 minesweepers. I mean, that is just a huge amount to organise on a really rough sea, where the current is going at at 90 degrees to where you are, at 45 degrees to the direction in which you're passing. You have got a very very dense minefield to traverse to get through between 7 and 10 miles off the Normandy coast. And if you haven't cleared it, your whole invasion force is going to be absolutely stuffed.
Yeah.
So you've got to clear these channels. So how do you do that when mines are not staying static? They're sort of sweeping all over the place. And there's this swell. So it's an incredibly complex operation, which involves marking, effectively taping, is what you would do if it was on the ground. You're taping your channel through, so if you're going through a minefield on the ground, what you do is you get little white tape and you put it down on the ground and you go, okay, that is the cleared channel. Don't step either side of that white line. But you can't do that on sea. So what you have to do is you have to have these Dan boys, which are these little they're boys with a little wire on and a little flag. And you have to mark those. But first of all, you've actually got to clear the channel. So this is incredibly complex. And what you have is you have these minesweepers operating together to sweep a channel. So that they're kind of, you said where you've seen those sort of photographs of harvesters on the plains of Canada, on the prairie. Yeah. And there's kind of sort of 4 of them all in a row, sort of slightly staggered, and they're just munching through this huge, great wheat field. It's sort of like that with these minesweepers, and each of them have got these wires on them because the mines are under the surface, so they're on weights and they're on a wire. And so what you've got to do is cut the wire and then destroy the mine,
surface the mine,
and destroy it. And you've got to do that ahead of the channel. You can't start sweeping the channel too early because then the Germans will know what you're up to. So you've got to do it only like an hour or two ahead of the main invasion force. So, no pressure then. And you have these they're like sort of fishing hooks, fishing lines effectively, but with cutters on them called kites and otters. And these have to sweep and just try and cut the wires. And then you've got to destroy them. And they do it across every single beach. They achieve those channels, the 2 channels per a mile wide, per invasion beach, and it is 100% successful. It is it's
extraordinary.
It's so complicated, and they spent weeks trying to work out how they were going to do this. I mean, weeks, How do we actually do this? I think it's absolutely breathtaking how brilliant that was done. And they never get any praise. I mean, they're never mentioned. I mean, it's just astonishing.
Well, they're like, but it's like a train running on time, isn't it? No one notices. Yeah. It's only when the train's late that anyone complains about the train. Yeah. I mean, the other thing, of course, to remember about D-Day, and again, it's sort of kind of going back to the sort of original point we were making, is that D-Day is part of a continuum of activity.
Right.
It isn't a singular moment, a singularity. It's part of this ongoing rolling continuum of activity that, and again, and we've talked about this before, that the Dieppe raid is the one where people go, lessons learned at Dieppe were applied in Normandy. Well, yeah, but lessons learned in North Africa and in Sicily and this ongoing continuum, rather than and again, that's the kind of mistake to make where if you think of Montgomery famously said, apparently there is to be a second front. I have been fighting myself on a number of fronts. I suppose they have some other numbers, number 5 or number 6. Number 2 seems to have been missed out. So he's making an excellent point.
Yeah, he is.
Which it's politically known as the Second Front, so it becomes known as that. In popular. Oh, that's the front door. We'll just let that moment pass.
Some more models.
It probably is. I had a dingo arrive yesterday. Anyway, the point is, it becomes the Second Front in popular imagination and everything. Yeah. But then you get the grim business of people calling people in Italy a D-Day dodgers and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But actually, it's part of this combined operations continuum, isn't it, D-Day? And of course, it isn't the last amphibious landing either. No. That the Allies do. It isn't the end.
No.
In that respect, because you've got Walcheren to come, you've got Dragoon.
Yep.
You've got all this stuff still going on, and the Navy is sort of the Navy's sort of like the Army's midwife on these occasions, isn't it? Delivering the baby and hoping that it doesn't get dropped, basically, and in each of these 100%. Circumstances.
Yeah. And just think what they're also bringing over. I mean, people also tend to think of, in terms of sort of men and rifles and ammo and all the rest of it. But they're also bringing over kind of gargantuan numbers of bulldozers and graders and PSP so they can make airfields and stuff. But let me give you 2 more examples where I think the Navy is absolutely stupendously good. So first of all is Long-sur-Mer. It's one of these sites that people go to. That you go to Omaha Beach, you go to the American Cemetery, and then you sort of cut along towards Arromanches. And before you get to the remains of the Mulberry Harbour, there's the detour to Long-sur-Mer, and there are those 4 whopping great casements with their naval guns inside. And I think it's on the second or third one, you can see that the shield around the gun. So for those who haven't been there, they're huge, great sort of domed concrete. Inside at the bottom is surrounded by more concrete is an aperture where there is a whopping great gun, and the gun has a kind of sort of steel shield around it, sort of armour plate shield, and you can see that on the left hand side of the shield it has been completely smashed, and you can see the trajectory of this shell that has come through, smashed the shield, and then gouged this huge lozenge shaped groove out of the side of the breech and totally destroyed that gun. That gun is no longer going to work. Now, that was fired by HMS Ajax, which is a light cruiser, from 6 miles away. Now, no GPS, no laser tracking, nothing. That is just good old-fashioned, know where you stand.
Practice.
An amazing gunnery.
Practice makes perfect.
100%. Yeah. It is amazing. You again, when you're standing there, and what you see is a smashed shield and a groove, you just think, oh, that's quite interesting. But then if you just take a few steps back and actually just think about what has been involved to achieve that, it is just gunnery of the highest caliber. And there's not many navies in the world that can do that. That is just it's amazing. And then the third point I want to make go on.
But the Royal Navy made sure there aren't any other navies that can do that, because they've sent them to the bottom of the ocean or trapped them in fjords in Norway.
Yeah, they absolutely have.
Because the other thing is all the things we're talking about here, you can't do that unless you've created air superiority, air supremacy is a thing that gets talked about an awful lot in the progress of the history of the Second World War, because aerial warfare is novel. And, we've talked a lot about the Battle of Britain. That is the first time there was ever an encounter like that, where actually two air forces, without a tactical army element to consider, meet one another and fight purely for air superiority or whatever. And the Allies have air supremacy in Normandy, and it's supremacy, not superiority, in Normandy.
Yeah.
And then from then onwards, and that's a thing that rightfully is considered. But the idea of naval supremacy,
because it's like your train analogy again, though. It's just so taken for granted that it's ignored.
Yeah,
but I think that's wrong.
Exactly.
I don't think it should be ignored. I think it should be completely celebrated, and I think it's absolutely amazing. And so the third point I wanted to make is Omaha Beach, which is endlessly fascinating, of course. But it's worth just analysing how many German defenders there are on Omaha Beach. And, the way it's depicted, because of Saving Private Ryan, you just assume there's kind of thousands of Germans sort of manning every inch of the bluffs, all with machine guns and 88mm and all the rest of it. In actual fact, there's 84 machine guns along that stretch. There's about 350 men tops manning the whole thing. There's only 32 guns, of which the two largest are 88mm, but there's just two 88mm. The rest are 50mm and 75mm. Most of them are 50mm. So in other words, by 1944 standards, quite small caliber. And when we're talking about 50mm, 88mm, what we're talking about is the diameter of the shell that is being fired. So 88mm, that's 8.8 centimetres. That's the diameter shell. That's quite a big bad boy. But opposing them are 183 guns of over 90mm. Some of which are kind of, 14 inch. Well, I don't know what 14 inches, but I'll have a look at that. It's 14 inches is like 320 millimeters. So it's a really big boy. So and that fire support is just absolutely enormous. Now, it's true that there are some field guns further inland, a mile or two back from the coast, which are firing out to sea and all the rest of it, and are dangerous. But in terms of firepower, it is an absolute mismatch. And people always kind of think, the infantry are coming off and all they've got is machine guns against this kind of wall of German guns. Well, it's just not true, because it's not just 183 main guns that these warships have. They've also got pom-poms and which are quick firing, 20mm, 40mm cannons, which they can traverse horizontally and fire at the coast as well. And if you're a German machine gunner, or even just a gunner on your 50mm gun, and you're being pounded by destroyers and light cruisers and even heavy cruisers and even a battleship, every time that shell comes in, boom, lots of dust. What are you going to do? You're going to duck down, aren't you? And if you're ducking down, crouching, covering your head and wishing to God you could be with your mother and anywhere but here, you're not going to be firing a gun, are you?
Yeah. Well, but this again, attacking is difficult. It
is, of course.
Of course, and this is the thing. This is why what happens in that sector on Omaha Beach happens is that attacking is hard. Attacking against automatic weapons is difficult, which is why you need this colossal preponderance of artillery and gunnery, because that's the only way you're going to make this work. And very often, debates about the Allies devolve into this. Oh well, they have this sort of material preponderance. They outgun the other side, almost like there's something
cheating,
unfair about it, or cheating. I'm entirely comfortable with the idea that the Allies to attack the Germans completely saturate somewhere with artillery before one guy gets off a boat. Why wouldn't you do that? And it's sort of characterised as the First World War thing. It's the First World War, massive artillery barrage, and then in you go. You look at you look at this. This is exactly the same thing, but because it's naval gunnery, people aren't thinking of it. And but
they should be thinking of it.
Attacking is hard.
It is really hard. But again, you look at Omaha Beach, and it is really interesting looking at all those after-action reports, because the Americans are very, very good about doing all this. And every single assault platoon commander that survived had to write a report. And even in the 29th Infantry, which is one of the ones that gets hammered at the Verville draw at the western end of Omaha Beach, and that's the bit that's being really depicted in the opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan, there are lots of there are a number where it goes, got off the beach with 1 dead, 2 wounded. Got off the beach with 1 wounded. I mean, it is not the wholesale slaughter that everyone thinks it is. In parts it absolutely was. It depends where you were and what time you landed. But again, this is part of the sort of the way people look at D-Day hang up, isn't it? Is that first morning of the battle isn't the point. It's the point. It's getting off the beach that's more important than getting on the beach, isn't it? Anyone can get on. Anyone can get on a beach. Getting on a beach is one thing. Anzio is a good example. It's getting stuck that's the next thing. And Utah Beach, which of course that goes to much easier progress, they then take ages to come off the beach. Yes.
And make slower progress than, in fact, the guys at Omaha do.
Yeah.
That Omaha gets off to this, in this sector, to this sticky start, but then actually they're miles inland quite quickly. Utah Beach, they land without too much drama and then don't get off the beach.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. And one of the great advantages, one of the disadvantages of when you're attacking Omaha Beach is you've got these bluffs from which the enemy can point guns at you and shoot you, which you don't have so much at Utah Beach. But the problem with Utah Beach is you've then got this flooded area immediately behind the dunes, which is, as you say, it's an absolute bitch. Whereas because of the high ground, you haven't got any flooding at Omaha. So once you actually got the bluffs, it's
exactly.
Not
and
plain sailing.
You come down to one of those. Yeah, exactly. And you come down to one of those compared to what things, like what we've talked about before, and actually, if you want to look at which beach works best, you need to compare how the thing happened. One of the things you really need to consider what happens next. What happens on D+1?
Quite, because and D plus up to D plus 14. Because what's really interesting about the 4th Infantry Division is that everyone sort of goes, well, the amazing thing about that was on D-Day. Do you know what? They had fewer accidents than they did on Slapton Sands. Fewer dead than on Slapton Sands. You go. Yeah, but fast forward 2 weeks, they've got 100% casualties in the front line. Their frontline infantry companies. Yeah,
it's a man a yard or something. A man a yard of ground.
I mean, the losses of whereas the 1st Infantry Division, they go into the centre of the line towards Comont, and comparatively speaking, compared to 29th Infantry, and certainly compared to the 4th Infantry that land at Utah Beach, they very small casualties. I mean, they've earned it. They've been in Tunisia, they've been in Sicily, and all the rest of it. So they need a bit of slacker time. But it's not slack. But I mean, it's just easier time of it compared to everybody else. But 4th Infantry just get absolutely hammered in the days and couple of weeks that follows D-Day. So absolutely spot on.
Okay, James, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break now, and when we get back, more D-Day. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. It's June the 6th. There's only one thing we could possibly be talking about. It's D-Day. When you start peeling the D-Day onion, it's endless, isn't it? I mean, and you can zoom right down into, and we're very, very one of the first podcasts we did, Tim Rosevere, Major Tim Rosevere at Troan.
Oh, yes.
With
I'm so glad you put me on to
falling
him.
Off the trailer. All that sort of stuff, and then all the way back out to the likes of to Montgomery presenting the plan at St Paul's School.
Yes,
and as you say, everyone going, that's the plan we've all agreed on.
It's the best plan. There is no other plan. There's no other plan you could have put in. I don't think. I still cannot get over how strung up people get about flipping con on day one. On D-Day, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, he's a really entrepreneurial businessman, incredibly successful, and he was just talking about kind of sort of life generally, and he said it's really important to always have to give people aims, which are and objectives, which are at the absolute outer reach of what can be achieved, because what you never want to do is to have complacency. You never want people to kind of reach that goal and then go, okay, now what? Yeah. And I thought, That's Miles Dempsey. That is exactly Miles Dempsey's leadership style.
Well, it's also like the arguments that then follow about the Overlord battle is that, it was meant to be a breakout, but it wasn't. Are you really going to tell men, by the way, what we need you to do is to trick the Germans for 3 days? It's going to be costly, but
you probably die.
It's going to be costly. A load of you are going to die, but on balance, that's actually the way we're going to win this. No, you've got to say, and if this goes well, chaps, we'll break out and the war will end.
We'll all be home by Christmas.
The war will end before Christmas. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what else you got? And obviously, then you get into, there's the balancing act of telling people things truthfully, but also giving them something to aim at. I mean, it's obviously. And Monty says a thing about, he says, Jonathan Ware posted these earlier on Twitter, so I credit where it's due. I'm dealing in men's lives and all I can afford is one mistake. Can't allow anyone to make a second. Right? So of course, part of in the mix is saying to people, I want you to try and, if all goes well, we'll take Con. That's what he's saying. He's not saying he's also not saying if we don't take Con day one, we're screwed, which is the sort of implication. The offensive's failed if we don't take Con on day one.
But also, he's not saying let's take Con on day one. That's Miles Dempsey.
I know.
He's saying what? Okay, let's just be clear about this. Okay, Monty's brief is the overview of the campaign. It is. So the first thing, secure the flanks, get on, make sure that and I've said this so many times, but the single most important thing about any D-Day, whether it be Torch, whether it be Salerno, whether it be Husky in Sicily, whether it be Overlord in Normandy, is that it doesn't fail. That trumps absolutely everything. So, and if it doesn't fail, that is a massive, massive tick. Because if it doesn't fail, that means you're going to win. So the kind of minutiae of how it happens is kind of, in the big scheme of things, neither here nor there. So what Monty does is say, okay, what we need is 5 beaches, landing beaches. 6 would be great. It'd be great to have Band on the other side of the River Orme, but we haven't got enough shipping for that. Shipping constraints, despite having an invasion fleet of nearly 7,000 vessels in total and 4,127 landing craft, it's still not quite enough. To do what they want to do comfortably. But it's enough to make sure it works. So secure the flanks with the airborne operations, have the 5 invasion beaches. Then it is up to the individual army commanders to then work out their objectives.
Yeah. Now,
in consultation with Monty, of course, but it is Dempsey who says, let's get Con on day one. Why does Dempsey say that? Because it's 10 miles from the beaches. The previous year, in July 1943, he is 13 Corps Commander, and his D-Day objective is Syracuse, which is 10 miles from the Avila invasion beaches, which is achieved. Yeah. So it's a perfectly reasonable assumption. He knows that it's, at the outer reach of what can be done, but let's have it because we don't want to kind of get there and then not know what to do. It's not like the whole campaign... but succeeds or fails on whether Con falls on day one. That's just nonsense.
No. But now, am I right in thinking? So Cossack in late '43 Freddie Morgan, isn't it?
Yeah, he's appointed in April 1943 is when he first gets the post.
Right. So before Sicily, and he's been told, crack on with figuring out how we open the second front.
Right.
In Northwest Europe, how we get to fight the Germans closest to Germany.
Yeah.
And he delivers depending on how you look at it, there are Morgan's advocates, and then there are those who go, oh well, whatever. Because Montgomery then leaves Italy and is given that job, and told, right, okay, get on with sorting this out. And Morgan's plan is smaller, isn't it? It's 3 beaches, isn't it?
Because he's given less, he's given less material and resources to do it.
Yeah. And Montgomery arrives and goes, nah, we've got to completely beef this up, change it. And that, which is obviously part of the argument that's going on at Cossack at the time, anyway. Yeah. That they're having this debate about how big, what they can actually do, what they need to, I mean, one of the things, of course, I think is always worth bearing in mind about Allied effort is it's always kind of 6 months ahead of its ideal equipment state, isn't it? So
Yes.
if you'd done D-Day, done D-Day a year later, you'd have been able to land at Bure. You'd have been able to do everything that you want to do. It's like Market Garden in September. If you'd done that the next year, you'd have been able to land everyone in one lift. The Allies are always slightly behind, but that's because they're splitting the difference and trying to win the war as soon as possible, as soon as they can do it, rather than waiting for the kit actually to catch up. Which of course is one of the interesting things about the Pershing tank, of course, is it's ready, could have been ready for D-Day, but they think no, we'll just go with the Sherman because let's just get on with it.
Well, it's also because the Pershing is really heavy, and because
exactly, but
because
exactly,
you've got to get you've got to get over broken bridges, and it's too heavy for that, and it takes up more space on a Liberty ship. You get more
all the other
firepower.
equipment that reflects that won't be ready yet. So you just go, well, we'll go with what we got. And so the Allies, like I said, the Allies are always basically kind of ahead of the ideal kit circumstance, even though we start right at the start of this, the naval effort is gigantic. It's still not quite ideal, which is sort of amazing, really,
isn't it?
I mean, yeah.
I mean, the kit thing is you're going down a rabbit hole that really doesn't need to be got down. I mean, the interesting thing about it is the amount of complaints that there were from people at the time, but give me an army in history that hasn't complained and had kit envy of the enemy. I mean. You always do, and everyone always sees tigers lurking around every hedge, and everything's an 88, and
hoplites at Thermopylae going, God, those Persians have got cool helmets, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's part and parcel. But the way the Allies have worked out their way of war is to have vast amounts of firepower. You goad out the enemy. What they've discovered is that the Germans always counterattack. So you dangle a carrot in front of them to make them do that, which is the infantry and the armour, which is why they suffer so appallingly. But because they're actually a comparatively small proportion of the actual army itself, the casualties in total are kind of hard, but they're terrible, but kind of manageable. But that's how you get them. And then the moment the Germans emerge from their kind of foxholes and their camouflage out into the open to do their counterattack, that's when you hammer them, with everything you've got, whether it be offshore naval power, whether it be artillery, whether it be air power, And it's a very effective way of doing it.
Hurling over jeeps. That's what the airborne soldiers are, when the shelling comes in.
Yeah.
With their naval FOOs, they go, it's some guy on Pegasus Bridge, I think. They're firing jeeps over, sir, because the shells are so big. The soldiers have never seen shells this big.
No, and you can see, if a 16-inch gun is firing, you can see the shell pass over.
You can see the shell because it's so enormous.
It's just absolutely amazing. But you were keen to talk about the Merville Battery, and I think we should.
Oh no, you know what? That's another time. We'll talk about that another time.
Really?
You know what? Because again, like I was saying, we're peeling this onion, and I went to glance back at Merville Battery stuff, and I got distracted by the story of Alistair Pearson, who's commanding officer.
He's so cool, isn't he? He's such a dude.
Extremely cool, and his management style. There's this great story. So basically, he's second in command of 8 Para, with Hill, who then becomes brigadier of
3rd
Parachute Brigade.
Yeah.
And 8 Para is one of his battalions. 9 Para is the other battalion, which is Otway's outfit. And after Italy, Pearson is sent back to the UK, and he's given an admin job at 6th Airborne Division. And Windy Gale sits him down and goes, you shouldn't be an admin. You're wrong for that, right?
Yeah.
And so gives him 8 Para to command. And the story, I wish I had this kind of chutzpah. So apparently what happens when he first meets the battalion, the car pulls up like that. He gets out the car and he says, and he apparently sometimes could not be understood because of his Scots accent, but I think that's English snobs who said that, to be honest. But he gets out the car and he goes, I have never seen such a shower in all my life, and gets back in the car, drives off. that management style. It's just so beautiful. And then he's, you know, he says, he goes back to Gale and he goes, we need to sort this. I need to be left to my own devices to sort this battalion out. And Gale says, fine. And he says, and I don't want anyone coming to see me to find out how I'm getting on. Least of all Brigadier Hill. Least of all my brigadier. And Gale says, great, no problem, and sorts that. And then once he's happy with them as an outfit, he says to Hill, all right, you can come and have a look. And it's that sort of autonomy that's really, really interesting. And then there's reflected in how he runs his battle in the Bois de Bavent following D-Day, which is just an extraordinary story. And, you know, he doesn't know that Roosevelt has blown the bridge at Troarn, so he sends out Jukes to do it. Jukes comes back. They realise that there's a party of guys who are cut off, and he needs to go and rescue them. So he says to Hill, "I'll go myself because I've got the most experience, and I'll take my mortar platoon with me because they're the strongest, and they'll be able to do the most lifting and help get these blokes out." And they go via where there's a crashed glider because because they're basically the wrong side of this blown bridge. They know there's a dinghy in the glider, so they go to the glider and blow up the dinghy, and they get in the river, and a bloke puts his bayonet through the dinghy and it sinks, right? And Pearson balls him out, and he says something to the effect, and this is sort of obviously the polite version, which he goes, well, if we get found by the Germans, then, you know, good luck to you. And I imagine that is not how that conversation actually ran. But they get another dinghy, and they're pulling people back. They're getting the guys back across into the battalion area, and they've got a truck. They're pulling a cart, and it's really noisy and squeaky. And Pearson basically thinks, right, well, we're going to get shot up by our own side. And interestingly, Pearson's a veteran of the Battle for France and was in 52nd Lowland when they were sent back into Normandy. So he's been to Normandy before, right? So he's thinking we're going to get shot up when we re-enter the battalion area. So he instructs the men to sing "Roll Out the Barrel." Because he knows that they'll hear him coming, and it can't be anyone else.
That's so funny.
So that's what they do, and then we get into that battalion essentially bayonet charging the Germans out of the Bois de Bavent.
Yeah,
him directing it all, you know, and it's really, 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 really hardcore. And you know, what a fascinating guy, and
he was a baker before the war. That's what I really like about him.
That's right. Yeah. He was a baker. Yeah.
He was a baker,
and obviously a brilliant leader. Anyway.
And there's that great story about him in Sicily when he goes over and the transport pilot wants to turn back, and he goes, "If you don't turn back, I'm going to shoot you." And he goes, "If you shoot me, you won't be able to land." He goes, "Don't need to land with paratroopers."
Yeah.
It's just
I don't need to land with parachutes, pal.
A parachute, I'll get you. Yeah, exactly. And he just looks cool, and he hasn't got an old-fashioned moustache, and he just looks cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's super cool. Anyway, we could talk about D-Day forever as usual. That's probably enough, isn't it?
It's probably enough, isn't it? You know, whet the appetite. Do you know what we have done, though? We haven't really got beyond D-Day.
Well, I know, but all right.
No.
See a D+1 to D+77. Oh no! See you in Paris, James.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much, everyone, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this little snippet of D-Day. Cud chewing. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, I just want to have one little plug, and that is that actually Beyond the Beaches is this TV series I did last year with Dr. Mike Simpson, US Special Forces, ex-US Army Ranger, was on the Osama bin Laden raid. He's a very cool guy. And it is available to watch now on normandy44.info.
Normandy44.info. There you go, everyone.
Should be on Amazon, but it's taken 2 months to load up. Now, what can you do? Cheerio, everyone! Oh, dear.